Hey, hope you're good. Just Matt here. Just going to shoot you a little video on carbohydrates. Just keep it nice and simple. Pardon the pun here. Simple and complex. Just to go through some basics around carbohydrates. By no means the Bible on carbohydrates, but just to give you some background information. I think carbohydrates often get a bad rap, especially when people are trying to lose body fat. But when it comes to performance, we know that they are really, really important. Okay, so differentiating between carbohydrates in terms of whether you've got what your goals are. Okay, and we'll discuss perhaps the difference between fibrous and non-fibrous carbohydrates, vegetables or not, and we can talk about how that may impact on performance and on losing body fat. Okay, so firstly, just in case you're not aware, carbohydrates are a major macronutrient, and they're a primary. We have three macronutrients: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, and they are the primary source of energy for the body and brain. Okay, nice and easy for the body to break down and use. In terms of their structure, there are two different types of carbohydrate. You've got the simple ones and the complex ones. And the complex ones are a little bit harder to break down. They give you a little bit more sustained energy, and the simple ones broken down really easily, and giving you sort of a lot quicker source of energy. Okay, at a cellular level, they contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And unlike the essential amino acids and fatty acids, there are no essential carbohydrates. Okay, it basically means that we can obtain everything we need nutritionally from other sources of food. So carbs aren't necessarily necessary, okay, within the diet. Now, when we say necessary, that's obviously necessary based on your goal. Okay. Simple carbohydrates are the smallest and simple type of carbohydrates known as mono and disaccharides, basically meaning they contain one or only one or two subunits of sugar. Okay, these types of carbohydrates are quickly absorbed in the small intestine, which gives you a really quick spike in blood sugar levels. Okay, and a boost energy. So they're your sort of really simple, like sweets, sugars, cereals, sugary drinks that you can see here in the diagram. Okay, really quick and obviously useful at certain times when energy drops low, like if you have somebody who's going into a diabetic coma, then obviously different types of hypoglycemia, should we say, bring them back up, their blood sugar level back up, useful for that. Obviously if you're doing a sporting event, maybe like an Ironman, using the flat coke or something like that is also useful to help bring sugar levels back up quickly. Complex carbohydrates, as I alluded to earlier, are a little bit harder to break down. So these tend to be more fibrous. Okay, they're called polysaccharides since they have more than two subunits of sugar linked together. Okay, these types basically have a greater bond. Okay, these types of carbohydrates take longer for the body to be broken down. Slower digestion means there's no rapid spike in blood sugar, and the energy release is a little bit prolonged, as I was mentioned earlier. So things like whole grain breads, pastas, oats, those sorts of things included within that, vegetables, legumes, and also fruits as well. Okay. The glycemic index. Okay, so the glycemic index you hear mentioned quite a lot, and it basically what it talks about is the effect of certain carbohydrates on blood sugar levels. Okay, therefore represents a metabolic response of the body to the carbohydrates we eat. It's classified into three groups. We've got low GI, medium GI, and high GI. Okay, so the numbers there, foods, just to give you a value, foods that have a low GI do not raise the blood glucose levels as much, nor as fast as foods that have a high GI. Okay, so at times when you really need a quick energy boost for a particular sport or activity, you'd have a more of a high glycemic, and when you want a more sustained energy, perhaps your breakfast for the day, you'd go for a slightly lower GI food. Glycemic load. Okay, glycemic load was introduced to basically represent the carbohydrate glycemic index and the carbohydrate content in a serving. So basically, looking at what impact that food has on the blood. Okay, so foods that have a higher amount of protein, fat, or acidity will help blunt the glucose response. Okay, so things like sugary drinks tend to have a very high glycemic load because they're low in protein, low in fat, and tend to have a massive impact on the bloodstream because they get into the bloodstream really quickly. Okay, so its glycemic load is also something for us to think about in that respect. Below we have a table. Okay, so we've got the glycemic index and the glycemic load of different foods. So you've got white bread there. Yeah, really high, sort of 72 on the glycemic index. So it's a high GI food, and it has a glycemic load of 10. Okay, if you look at the baked potato here, so very high GI, okay, because you basically in the baking process you've reduced all the starch, taking all the starch out, Okay, and then we scroll our way down, and we can see the sort of like glycemic load there, a very high glycemic load as well. Okay, so this is where baked potatoes useful at times for recovery, but I would say if your goal is to lose body fat, this is probably a food that you wouldn't include. You might go for over that a sweet potato, as you can see, much less glycemic load and lower on the glycemic index. Still quite high, but if you're going to choose one or the other from that perspective, that might be useful. The role of carbohydrates. Okay, so although not essential in the diet, carbohydrates do have some critical functions to play. The primary source of energy for the body and brain. We do know that the body can produce energy through ketones from proteins, but that's a very drawn out process in terms of getting energy. Okay, and not optimal as yet for performance in terms of strength and long term or long duration exercise. Okay, so protein sparing prevents ketosis, which we've just mentioned there, and facilitates the body's metabolism of fat. Okay, so actually your fat burns in what we call a carbohydrate flame. Okay, so we actually need some carbs to burn some fat. Okay, at times. All right. Source of B vitamins for cholesterol metabolism. Okay, so we do get some B vitamins from the carbohydrates that we eat as well. Carbohydrate requirements. So there's no precise definition of exactly how many carbs should make up someone's diet, because obviously everyone's different. An individual's optimal intake does depend on age, gender, body composition, activity levels, your preference, your food culture. There's so many individual choices when we make with all of our foods. When we look at social elements, we look at the things that we see in front of us, what our eyes are drawn to. Whether we're eating with friends or family, there's so many social elements to what we choose in terms of our food. So you couldn't possibly say that everybody should eat this many carbs per day. What we can do is we can look at kind of like a number of grams per day to make up your total macronutrient breakdown. Okay, so the kind of standard is around 35% of what you eat, provided obviously you're eating the right amount. Okay, so 35% of your total macronutrient intake. So you've got 30% protein, 35% carbohydrate, 35% fat, as a general rule. Now, everybody varies a little bit. So some people function very well on slightly less carbohydrates, and some people just need slightly more. So it's individual. People who are more physically active and have more muscle mass can tolerate more carbohydrates than those who are sedentary. Basically, you have the ability when you're well trained to store carbohydrate within the muscles. Okay, so our ability to store carbs in the muscles and in the liver is impacted by how fit and strong we are. Because the fitter and stronger we are, the more muscle mass we will have, and therefore we will be able to store that within the muscle. Your metabolic health is also a significant factor. For those with any metabolic syndrome, obesity, or type 2 diabetes, the rules do change significantly for those people. Carbohydrate loss, for fat loss. Okay, so a high carb diet, a moderate carb diet, and a low carb diet. Okay, now to be in true ketosis down here, some people believe you actually need to be below 50 grams per day, which is very, very low. Okay, and so I would probably aim to start with if you're not sure where you should be, then maybe you would hit in this range here. Now it's a big range, that's double. So bearing in mind that for every gram of carbohydrate you consume, that's 4 calories. So that's 400 to 800. That's a big difference. Okay, so obviously you can play around with this a little bit to see what suits you and how well you go and how well you feel on those there. Okay, so there's a different amounts. And that's it for today. So that's our little video for you on carbohydrates. And just let us know if you have any questions on that one there. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.